really works, and it goes to the bottom line, and there are countless organisations who are making very significant additions to their income through more sophisticated pricing strategy. I also have to say that revenue management is maybe not exactly emerging practice. I was doing rudimentary revenue management when I was head of marketing at the London Symphony Orchestra 20 years ago. It was one of the most effective, that's where my interest came from. It's one of the most effective parts of our marketing strategy. And it's getting pretty common, at least in the US, much less so in the UK. And I hear lots of arts organisations say that they're doing dynamic pricing. But my observation is that quite a lot of them are not doing it very well. And I think what's emerging is a more sophisticated and effective strategies that are adapted to the cultural sector. And today I hope what we're going to do is showcase some of the very best emerging practice to be able to do this very well. So by way of introduction to revenue and management and dynamic pricing, I'm just going to introduce some of the key concepts underlying effective pricing strategy. I'm going to do a bit of a definition of terms and quickly outline the scope of tactical approaches before we move into the case studies. So again, this is probably not an ideal... no, I'm doing this the wrong way around. This is a pretty familiar expression to people. Everybody heard this? Everything is worth only what its purchaser will pay for it. Would anybody like to hazard a guess for me about who first coined that expression? Or when it was first coined?
Marshall Field.
Sears catalogue?
Aristotle.
Well, you're the closest.
Libid wins.
It was actually a Roman philosopher called Publius Cyrus in the 1st century BC. So truly there is nothing new in all of this. And I just want to illustrate this point by asking you, what would you pay for a slice of buttered toast? A quite old slice of buttered toast. Anyway, nothing? Depends how hungry you are. Yeah, well, it depends on a number of other things as well, actually. Justin Timberlake was presenting a radio, was a guest on a radio show a number of years ago, and he was a bit hungry and asked for a slice of buttered toast, but he ran out of time, so he didn't finish it. So this half-eaten piece of buttered toast ended up, you guessed it, on eBay, and sold for $3,000. So truly, everything is only worth what its purchaser will pay for it. So a bit more, well, apologies to the people yesterday who had Economics 101, because you're getting Economics 101 again. But it's the very basic relationship between price and demand, the notion that the more you charge of something, the less of it you'll sell, and the less you charge of something, the more of it you'll sell. You know, there's lots of contradictions to that in practice, but you really can't escape from the reality of that. The issue I'm putting out here, and I'm sure you can translate from my sterling into dollars, is if you've only got one price, you're effectively creating a limit on the volume that you can sell. Because there will always have been some people who, had you charged a little more, might still have purchased it. That's additional income. Equally, there may have been some people who, had you charged a little less, would have bought another ticket, taken a risk, bought another person, etc. And the point about this is that this multiplies. Because people's perceptions of value, as the toast example, are so different for everybody, that there's a wide range of different prices that people would pay, and that there's actually an intrinsic benefit in having a range of different prices. It's kind of self-leveling. You need to find those ranges of different prices to meet everybody's perceptions of value, because that is both additional income and additional volume of attendance. So just a few pricing principles then, just to get us started off. The first I've kind of already touched on, but people exchange money and, crucially, time. I'm not talking about time, but actually, probably that's more important for most people. I think we should remember when deciding whether or not to go to an arts event is the time that they're exchanging, in expectation of receiving value in return. That value is more perceived than real. Well, actually, unless you've been and seen it before, and a lot of people do go back to the same thing, it's absolutely perceived. You don't know what you're going to get. Perceptions of value, we think, are almost unique to each customer for each event. And that has the implication that I've just shown you with that pricing elasticity of demand, that there's an intrinsic benefit in offering a range of differentiated prices. And it's that price differentiation that's the key, because it allows organisations to achieve multiple objectives. So you can use price to optimise volume of attendance, you can use it to promote accessibility, and you can use it to maximise income. And a really, sorry, I'm jumping too far ahead. Cultural organisations have an enormous range of variables available to adjust prices in order to achieve those multiple objectives. And that flexibility is multiplied by the application of revenue management and dynamic pricing tactics. So just to illustrate this point, by what I call the pricing toolbox, or the differential pricing toolbox, there are potentially hundreds of variables. We start with what I call the price metrics, which is what are your prices? But you need to think not just about what are your prices, but how your prices relate to those natural thresholds, the round numbers, the $20, $30. How many prices have you got? What's the range and relationship between the differentiated prices? I'll come back to that in a second. And then once you've set your base prices, you can add surcharges, you can discount them, and perhaps most importantly, you can control how many units you have available of inventory at each of those prices, control and adjust that. So already we've got a load of different variables that we can play with in pricing. And then you overlay onto that what we call the value fences. Actually, I probably just ought to explain value fences, but value fences are the differences in value that you create to justify the differences in price. You can't just differentiate prices. You need to create a reason why prices are different. The primary value fences, as we call them, are firstly the product, so you can charge different prices for different shows. You can charge differently for different date and time, nothing new in that. You charge more on a Saturday than you do during the week, etc. And then you've got the venue variables, where you can charge different prices according to where people sit, which is obviously absolutely critical for performing arts, and doesn't work so well for the visual arts. So can I just do a quick trawl? How many visual arts representatives from visual arts? A few of you. Okay. I just want to say that the case studies we're really talking about performing arts here. The principles are absolutely the same, just the variables are different. So, and the key one is that you don't have different seats to differentiate, but nearly almost all of the other forms of differentiation you do have available. And then you can overlay on that secondary value fences. So you charge prices according to customer behaviour, subscription, so you charge different prices for frequency and for party size groups. You charge different prices for demographics. Well, essentially you have discounts and concessions, we call them confusingly in the UK. I know that means something completely different in the US. But discounts for, well, essentially in the UK it's old people, young people, poor people, disabled people are the four demographics that we reflect. And then you can charge different amounts for added value, through parking, all kinds of things. So if you overload those on there, you see this huge number of variables, even with a relatively simple pricing strategy. There's a huge number of variables that you can adjust in differentiated pricing. It's not really the subject that we're going to be talking about, although I think it underlies it, but I want to talk very briefly about the contribution that's now being made, moving away from classical economics in and especially in relation to metrics, but the range and relationships for prices, we need to think about the psychology of pricing. And there's a new branch of economics, behavioural economics, teaches us about the irrationality behind a lot of human decision making. People are very bad at making absolute judgments on things, especially prices. Whenever we judge the value of something, we're trying to compare it with something else. And our brain plays tricks on us. And this classic optical illusion gives exactly this point. I promise you, those two orange dots are the same size. I got out a ruler and measured them. I didn't believe it. They are the same size, but the point is that it's the size of the circles. Really, you see the point of it immediately. It's the size of the circles around them that creates that optical illusion. Well, exactly the same thing happens with pricing, and we need to think all the time about, in relation to one price, how does it look in relation to another price? I haven't got time to go into this, and this is actually my favourite subject at the moment, maybe next year. But you get into what we call anchor pricing, and my favourite, which is decoy pricing, which gets used quite a lot. Apple use it all the time in their pricing. My favourite example is a handbag shop. So you've got to design a handbag shop, and they've got a display of handbags in the window, and there's one fantastically expensive version right in the middle. That's not there because anybody's expecting anybody to buy it. It's there to make all the other handbags seem inexpensive. Decoy pricing. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention that because I think that's a very interesting new area of pricing that we need to look at. So, moving on to the subject that we're talking about today, revenue management and dynamic pricing. I want to do a little bit of definitions, because a lot of people, including me until not that long ago, kind of use these terms interchangeably, but they are actually different. What I've already been talking about in laying out that matrix of different prices is variable pricing. I prefer to call it differentiated pricing because I think that conjures better the importance of differentiating the value against. You're not just changing the prices, you're differentiating the prices according to value. Yield management, dynamic pricing, and revenue management. So variable pricing is the practice of charging different prices for different elements of value. For example, different seats of different productions on different days. Yield management focuses on maximising yield. That's about how do you maximise the income you get from each seat. Dynamic pricing, the distinction here, rather than you charge different prices for different seats on different days, dynamic pricing means you can charge different prices for the same seat on the same day, usually over time. That's that distinction. But then revenue management, I think, is an umbrella term for all of these tactics used to adjust prices according to demand. So I just want to explore along these lines with a better definition. This guy Robert Cross documented the introduction of revenue management in the US early airline industry in the 70s when the airlines were deregulated. And he says that revenue management ensures that companies will sell the right product to the right customer at the right time for the right price. And the important thing to remember here, and why revenue management dynamic pricing work in airlines and also works here, that what it's all about is the perishability of the inventory. When the plane takes off, you can't sell another ticket. When the curtain goes up, you can't sell another ticket. So it's all about it's all about shifting inventory and using differences in price to make sure that you optimise the inventory that you sell. So one of the important things is that this includes reducing prices to stimulate low demand, as well as increasing prices to exploit high demand. And I think very often people think about dynamic pricing as just putting prices up. Actually, it's doing both. Let me explore that a bit more. So I think there are three key dimensions to revenue management. The first is, as I alluded to, is the extent to which you decrease price or increase prices. You should be doing both. And then there's the extent to which it's static or dynamic. And there's an assumption coming again from the airlines that revenue management is all about changing prices. Actually, as I'll illustrate in a moment, you can achieve revenue management objectives with completely static pricing. And then finally, and this is perhaps the most important one for me, and we'll be reflecting this in one or two of the case studies, but to the extent to which your pricing, your changes in pricing are underlying or explicit, and this is the extent to which the differences in pricing are apparent to the customer and can therefore be effective in managing demand across the inventory. Remember, it's all about the perishability of the inventory. And I want to use this, this is not real data or anything, this is just an illustration. And again, in sterling, but it's making the point. So it's a classic example, you've got a lower price during the week, you charge a lot on a Saturday, but you've still got a lot of demand on the Saturday. There's only a small difference in price. But what happens if you increase that price? Here I've just put it up to £25 compared to £15. The point is what you're trying to do is create a big enough difference in price to motivate a change in behaviour. So that actually if you can make that difference in price big enough, it's slightly counterintuitive, but what you're trying to do is drive demand out of the peak period because there's usually latent demand for that period. So that actually what you're trying to do is use differences in price to drive customer demand because you make money twice. You maximise your income where you've got the peak on the peak performances, and you manage to sell tickets that you wouldn't otherwise have sold, remember your perishable inventory during the week. You don't need to do anything dynamic in order to achieve that. And a lot of theatres are doing that now, although I think my experience is that a lot of theatres don't create a big enough differential to make that happen, and that's a battle we're constantly fighting, especially with commercial promoters, strangely enough. So just to illustrate this in context with an airline, this is a big airline in Europe, EasyJet, and here is exactly what I've just been talking about. You see, in fact I'm going to Amsterdam in a few weeks, so this is me looking up prices, and you can see that I've said I actually want to go on the Monday the 16th and come back on the Thursday the 19th, and it's offering me up this range of different prices. But you can quickly see which flights they're not selling so many for, and they highlight it, and they're trying to guide my decision. And how many people do this? We do this. I think the interesting thing here is the reason revenue management works in airlines is that we all know how to get cheap tickets. It's because we buy in, we understand what they want us to do. How do you get a cheap ticket? Book early, be flexible about the time you want to fly. And here it is illustrated. And I think one of the really interesting things about this is how explicit this is and how well presented this is. And I think this is one of the big missing links in theatres and performing arts revenue management, is that we're not doing this presentation. Although we do have a case study coming up with an organisation that's actually doing that. So I hope this is obvious already, but there are lots of different ways of doing revenue management, lots of different revenue management tactics. Inventory control. I fly across the Atlantic pretty regularly over the last few years, and I have to tell you that since the financial meltdown 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, the planes have never been fuller. They're always full. And why is that? There's less planes. They're managing the inventory down. So that's a really interesting option for pricing, but I'm not sure how palatable that's necessarily going to be, is to improve the quality of your pricing by putting on less performances. You get into variable pricing by performance. Well, I won't go into that. That's pretty self-evident, and we'll come back to that. Strategic discounting. Now, actually, ad hoc, last-minute discounting is the enemy of revenue management. But strategic discounting plays a key role, and that can include subscription design, dynamic groups management, early bird, even standby or rush. I seem to have removed from that list, but rush is a revenue management tactic as long as you control it properly. You get it scaling based. We've got at least 2 case studies coming up, including I think for the CSO in a moment on scaling based revenue management. Then you get into premium sales, where you can do a value add premium, where you can differentiate by adding value to the seat rather than changing the well, you can change the price as well, but you differentiate by adding value or by leveraging on sales, and I'll talk about that as well in a case study. And then you get into the true dynamic pricing, one that doesn't get talked about much, but of course the most truly dynamic form of pricing is an auction. There's some arguments that that's the only way to truly find where the price floats in a market. But our behavioural economics kicks in again then, because there's an awful lot of irrationality goes on in auctions, and people get competitive. So you have to be slightly careful about assuming that's actually setting your price. Get into dynamic pricing management. We'll talk about pure airline style. Again, we've got a case study where exactly that. We've also got a case study of an airline hybrid where we've actually adjusted pure airline pricing to fit the particular needs of the cultures. So I'm more or less done here. We're going to move into the case studies. We're going to ask Philippe and Kevin to talk to us about the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Tim, you're going to hear more from Tim Roberts. Oh, he's going to get a coffee. He promised he'd be back. Talking about some work he and we did together for Sydney Opera House, which is much more to do with the challenges of integrating revenue management in a monumentally large and complex organisation. Laurie, where are you, Laurie? Hi, has been working with my colleague Stephen of the Pricing Institute on some prices she's going to talk to us about. I'm going to give an example of some very clever stuff that Jim Royce at the Centre Theatre Group has been doing, coming out of some work we did. Duncan Webb is going to, I'm not quite sure what Duncan's going to do actually, but the presentation looks really good. It's a really interesting subject. And then my partner in crime and life, Debbie, is going to present some of the best pricing I think we've seen for a slightly surprising artistic product. So I think that's all I'll say for now, and leave you to ask Kevin and Philippe to talk.